Hello everyone, welcome to Confetti Industry Week 2021. We've got the privilege in the games department of running the first session today at 9 o'clock, so this is very much a first time thing for us. So welcome to your session with Pauline Martyn, who's going to be talking to you about the use of narrative in games. We'd like you to try and refrain from using the chat function while the talk is actually on, as it can be a distraction. But of course, you can feel free to ask questions using the chat function or preferably the Q&A section at the end of the talk. And we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. Obviously, we can't answer all the questions, but what we'll try and do is answer as many as we can, and we'll try and get the most relevant questions answered. We hope you're going to enjoy today's session. And I'd just like to say a massive thank you to Pauline for taking part and joining us today for our 15th Confetti Industry Week, which is amazing. Don't forget as well, you can still book into other events if you haven't already. If you just go to iw.confetti.ac.uk, you can book into all the other events there. We've got some great stuff coming up over the week in games, media and music. Make sure when you do sign up that you're using your Confetti or NTU email address, please. Don't use personal email addresses, otherwise it will get filtered out. As part of Confetti Industry Week 2021, we're also running a competition where you can win some great prizes. So all you've got to do is tag us on Twitter or on Instagram using hashtag IW21 and share your experiences throughout the week. So share the cool stuff. So, you know, for those of you today who are in this session, you're in the first session of Industry Week 2021. So that's really exciting. No pressure, Pauline. Pauline, please make sure you remain on the call at the end, just so we can have a quick chat and just do a little debrief at the end of it. And now, without further ado, here's Pauline.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone in the chat. So hi, I'm going to share my screen, so hopefully you'll be able to see that. Okay. So today I'm going to give you an introduction to narrative design. So a little bit about me. So this is me. I'm a narrative designer currently working for Ubisoft Reflections, which is in Newcastle. And prior to that, I studied games design. I made a couple of projects available on my website if you want to take a look. I made a game called Project Madison, and I wrote a thesis on the Yakuza games, culturalization of the games. I also used to work as a project management in the gaming industry. So I worked for Sony Interactive Entertainment and Activision. So I've been in the industry for a while, but currently working as a designer. So today what we're going to talk about, first, what is narrative design? So I'm going to try and define it for you. We're going to talk about the role itself. So when you work in the industry, what does that mean? If that all speaks to you, how do you become a narrative designer? So the skills you'd have to develop, or the kind of the work profile to be a narrative designer. And I'm going to touch on being a woman in games and kind of the topic of diversity in games. And finally, as I mentioned, there'll be a Q&A. And before we go on to that, I'll give you some resources. So if any of these topics are interesting to you and you want to look into them further, I'm going to hopefully get you started on that. So let's talk about narrative design. So what is narrative design? So it's a relatively new role in the gaming industry. So it's a little bit tricky to define, but I'm going to give it a try with you today. So I'm going to look at it through different lenses. So first of all, as the player, so when you play a game, you obviously, in the game, you have the what. So you have the actions, so we call the verbs. So, you know, what you do, if you walk, you shoot, you pick up, what you do in the game. And you also have the why, which is the context. So where are you? Why are you here? What's the kind of story? And in between, you have the how. So you have loads of kind of interactions between the two. And you have a part of the game which is contextualizing what you do. So, you know, why do you do these things? What's the reasoning behind it? And another lens we can use is the lens of the game. So again, you have gameplay, so the actions. You have the story, which is kind of the wrapper around this. Again, loads of links between the two. And this is basically where narrative design sits. So narrative design is when you take gameplay and story and you kind of try and mash the two. And the area in between is narrative design. So in terms of the tools, so as a narrative designer, you actually have a lot of tools at your disposal so that you can kind of influence or you can be part of. So let's take a look at that. you obviously, something that comes quite quickly to mind when you think of narrative design is words. So there's obviously in the game, you have things like dialogue, you have the context of the game, the lore, you have cinematic script. So when you have a cutscene, you'd have a script that actors would read, and that would get made into like a nice shiny cutscene. So of course that's a part of it, but there's many other parts of narrative design. So here you can see that you're starting to talk about cinematics. So cinematics, actually, there's loads of different types. There's cutscenes, there's things you see in the game, there's maybe kind of scripted events that you come across. So that involves obviously voice direction, stage direction, cinematic props. So what do you see in the cutscenes? What would the cinematic artist build? How it's kind of put together. So that's also kind of something narrative design can influence. And then here you're starting to go towards art. So you have, we talked about cinematics, but you have the environment. So what does the game look like, and what do you see in the game? What objects, what's the kind of art direction and so on. So you have environment art, obviously character design, which is really important, and sound design. So what is the kind of tone of the sound? What do you hear? When do you hear it? And then you start to move on to gameplay, obviously the actions you do, which we just talked about. So that would be the triggers. So when you encounter narrative, so when you have a cutscene or when you talk to a character, what is the kind of what are the features behind it? Is that a conversation system? Is that just something you overhear? So you have to think about these things when you build the game. And obviously the player actions. So, if you're in a game that's about farming and you inherit your grandfather's farm, in terms of gameplay, that has to fit. So it can't be just about shooting. It can't be about swimming or something. It has to be about, I don't know, tiling or something like that. So this is something that narrative influences. And of course, you have AI in games, so you have characters in the world, you have characters maybe that, you can do quests with, like AI, so that's another part of narrative. And then you start to loop back into character creation, which is usually something that narrative designers or writers do. So as you can see in this really messy slide, there's tons of stuff you can have influence on. And of course, most of these, there are experts in charge of it, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that, you can kind of you can have an impact, and you can have these conversations to kind of make sure that the game is narratively tight, and that's part of the role. I also wanted to give you some examples. So when when you play games, how does narrative design manifest? Like, what do you see in a game, which is the result of the work of a narrative designer? So I want to pick 3 games that I really love, and maybe you've played yourself. The first one is Dishonored, really great franchise. So in Dishonored, you have gameplay abilities, you have powers. So you can do stuff like teleport, you can summon a swarm of rats, for example. And in the story of the game, you have this kind of entity called the Outsider, who's kind of a god, very mysterious. You don't really know who he is when you start the game. And basically, the narrative design here is that throughout the game, you have these shrines to this god, and they are the kind of vector to give you the powers you have. And a really cool, minor spoiler, I'm afraid, is that when you start the game quite early on, you can choose to interact with this god or to just reject them outright. And depending on that, you will get the abilities or not. So you can actually do the whole game without any interaction. And this is a really great example of narrative design in terms of contextualizing what you do in the game. Another cool example, so I'm a massive fan of Dragon Age. And in the first one, and it's something that's quite common in RPGs, so you have AI companions. So, AI you can take with you on missions, and then you obviously, so Dragon Age is quite a narrative heavy game. So you have a big story, of course, but you also have character arcs, stories, you can romance characters. And the way the game kind of mashes these together is in a feature called the camp. So you can actually, outside of missions, you can kind of meet your AI friends, you can talk to them, you can kind of have some specific interactions. And there's also a whole system of approval, so you can kind of befriend characters, you can piss them off as well, which is quite funny as well. And there's a gift system, so these are kind of narrative features, again, to help you contextualize the actions and turn your actions into the story. And one final example, a recent game, Yakuza Like a Dragon. So I'm a huge Yakuza fan, so I'm glad to be talking about this today. So Yakuza is based around fighting. So it's kind of a brawler type game, typically, where you just go in the street and you have these gangs of enemies that you beat up with your fists. So that's how it works normally. And in the most recent entry, you actually have a protagonist obsessed by Dragon Quest, which is a turn-based RPG. And what the development studio has done is they've totally reworked the combat to be a bit like Dragon Quest. It's like a turn-based fight with kind of really funny enemy names. And again, it's kind of contextualizing the character. So the character is obsessed with it, so you see things through the lens of the character. And I think this is a really great example, again, of narrative design and the influence it can have on the actual gameplay in a game. So hopefully that gives you a better idea of what narrative design is. Now, in terms of what it means, so if you are a narrative designer like me, what do you do? Which is also a question that it's, can be a bit difficult to answer, but I will again give it a try. So I'm currently working for a studio. So as you know, studios come in all sizes. I work for Ubisoft, which is quite big. So what I'm going to tell you obviously will depend on the size of the studio. So it can be kind of more or less compressed. But generally speaking, in a studio, I'm sure you're familiar with that. You have obviously an art team, so character art, environmental art, 3D modeling, loads of different disciplines. You have the technical team, so kind of underpinning the core programming of the game. You have production, making sure things happen on time, on budget, with the right resources. So it's a huge job, very important. You have QA, QC, again, a really key function to kind of keep testing the game, make sure it's bug-free, that we catch all the issues as early as possible. And then you have design. So design is, in terms of how we can define it, is making the content for the game. So you create the play experience along with the other disciplines. And design, again, it can vary studio to studio, but because I work in a big studio, it's quite siloed. So we have game design, which is mainly systems design, so kind of the broader systems within the game. Level design, which is obviously how the levels look like, but also the pace, how the play experiences the kind of flow of the mission and the environment of the mission. Audio design, so again, anything to do with audio, like how the sound is processed and also the kind of massive databases in the back end. You have UI UX, so in terms of how the information is presented. And of course, you have narrative design, which is where I sit. And to give you an idea of a team structure, typically, if you see these roles coming up online, so you'd have a director. So directors tend to be the highest kind of position within the team. So they are kind of responsible for the creative direction of that particular section. So they really do the high level decisions around, for narrative, what the themes are for the game, the kind of overall story. Any decision pretty much has to go through them. You then would have a lead. So leads tend to be more focused on the team and growing the team, making sure there's the right skill set available in the team, because narrative can take kind of a few different forms. And they're kind of there to manage the resources and help people grow and do what they need to do in their role. And then, of course, you have narrative designers. And in some studios, including some Ubisoft studios, you have writers. So writing is sometimes separate from narrative design. So where I work, for example, we are all narrative designers, but I'm very focused on design, and some of my co-workers are very focused on writing. So that can depend. In smaller studios, the roles can be mashed together. So if you look at job specs, you're going to find that they are slightly different. So if you do want to be a narrative designer, it's something to keep in mind in terms of your career. And in terms of the team, I'm going to tell you how it works for me currently. So we have what's called mission cells. So we work on a mission together. It could be a level, a world. It's like basically a chunky piece of content. And of course, that would be me as a narrative designer. I would work really closely, typically, with a level designer who's also kind of handling the mission of the mission flow of the game. I would work with environment artists, so obviously how the game looks like, what kind of props do we need, how do we support the tone of what we're trying to say, and cinematics as well. So if there's cutscenes, if there's kind of smaller events in the level, we would all work together on that. So we have a really close collaboration with loads of different disciplines, but specifically these ones. And in general, obviously, because games are really collaborative, we get tons of support from all the teams I've mentioned. So from tech, from design, from QA and QC, from production, UI, UX, etc. So, I'm probably going to be saying that a few times today, but games are horribly difficult to make. So they involve loads of people, loads of kind of collaboration. So it's definitely in everyone's interest to kind of keep that communication flowing and to really work together on making, the content. And I want to give you a little idea of what a day in the life is for me. So most of my days look like this. And it's 90% meetings and 10% work. Sometimes I get to do some work. This is obviously a bit tongue-in-cheek, but what I'm trying to say here is that, again, because games are so collaborative, they're just really complex. So we spend a lot of time catching up, brainstorming, making sure we're on the same page. If something changes, for example, in the level, I would get involved to kind of make sure the narrative is still correct, that it still flows right. So there's a lot of catch-ups, daily catch-ups, weekly catch-ups, many meetings, and a lot of brainstorming. So again, if you're someone who enjoys doing that kind of stuff, bouncing ideas, finding solutions together, narrative design and design in general is a really great place for that. And to give you kind of a more granular idea of, what a random day as a narrative designer would look like. So for me anyway, it's an office job. So obviously, coffee, lunch, and home time are the kind of key elements here. I would typically start the day with what we call stand-up or scrum. You might be familiar with that already. So that means basically you'd stand up and you kind of talk about what you're doing today. So it's like, what are we all working on? So you can kind of see how the team's progressing and making sure you're in sync. Maybe then I would have a catch up with my mission friends from level design, environmental art, etc. So we would discuss maybe latest updates, if something changed, if we need to kind of take any actions, if we've received any feedback. So it's a place to kind of just generally catch up. And then, as I said, sometimes I get to work on my own a bit. So I would, typical design work I would do. So if I'm designing a feature, I would maybe do a flowchart to kind of really look at the player journey through the feature I'm making. And then have a quick lunch. And then after that, I would maybe try and prototype it. So part of the design role is obviously trying to put your ideas to the test and prototype them, seeing how they work in engine, seeing if you can kind of get someone else to try them. So I typically do some kind of in-engine implementation. And after that, maybe, so if you work in a big studio, and especially I think if you work at Ubisoft, you'll probably work on different time zones as well. So I work with an American studio. So for example, early afternoon, I might have a catch up with them. So I work with an animation team. So maybe I would have a catch up to say, hey, we've got some mocap, some motion capture that just came in. Can we have a look together? Is that the right thing for the cinematic you're working on? So again, kind of collaboration. So I work as part of the narrative team. So some of my co-workers do a lot of script writing. So we do things called table read, where we all read the script aloud, like a piece of script, and we kind of give feedback depending on our disciplines. So that's quite a cool thing as well, if you like the kind of performance side of doing scripts. And it's really helpful for them because they get to hear like what other team members think of the script, and it really helps get a sense of how it would play in the game, basically, before implementing it. And also work a lot with concept artists. So when I create characters, they would concept them, and then it would kind of move on to them being made into 3D models in this case. So, sometimes while they're working on a character for me, they'd have some questions about, we've got a bio, but we need to kind of clarify a few things. So again, more meetings to catch up, more meetings to sync up. There's a lot of that. And then what we try and do regularly, obviously, is play the game to kind of see how it's all coming along as much as possible. And probably legacy of me being a project manager, I would typically try and make to-do lists and make sure I know exactly what's going on. We work on loads of different pieces of content. We have a lot of stuff to juggle, so you have to be quite organized if you work in development. And one thing I want to mention, so I think you will have heard of it, obviously, is crunch. So crunch means systemic and heavy overtime. So it would mean maybe you do 12-hour days, 6 days a week for a month, 2 months, 3 months. And it's an unfortunate reality of some parts of the industry. So I'm glad to say I don't crunch, but it's real. It definitely exists. And it bears repeating that crunch is really bad. So it's really bad for you because, it can affect your mental health, your physical health. You're not going to do your best work. You're not going to produce, good work or kind of consistent work. So something to bear in mind if you enter the industry is to, as much as possible, try and avoid to crunch, or maybe avoid places that crunch, I would say. And then I'm going to just go a bit more in depth before we move on into some of the tasks I would do as a narrative designer to kind of give you a taste of what that would be like. So the first one I'm going to go through is mission breaking. So I've told you I work on missions. So again, kind of chunky pieces of content that would go in the game. So that would involve getting a brief from our director. So it's like receiving the brief, discussing the brief, and kind of understanding the story beats, discussing the context. So, you know, if I'm working on a mission, how does it fit in the overall narrative arc? So that's something my director would be able to tell me. Then we do the mission breaking proper. So as a narrative designer, I would kind of break it down into story beats. So how is the player experiencing the story? So, you know, design is always player facing. So where maybe a scriptwriter would focus on the content, like, okay, how does it sound? What is the tone? I would focus more on, okay, how do we present it to the player? So this is where kind of a lot of my work goes. So are we doing cinematics? Is it more environmental art? Are we doing kind of scripted events in the game? I would kind of start thinking about these things here. And again, working really heavily with the level game designers, say, you know, is my plan, does that work for your level? Does that work for the gameplay? Is it all in sync? You know, do we agree on how this is kind of progressing as a mission? And finally, again, big part of design is documentation. So I would kind of make a list of these story beats, document how they work, so what triggers them, where they are, maybe a short description. This is to kind of help with implementation. So whether, you know, I do some implementation, or sometimes it's more technical teams. So between ourselves, we have to be very clear how everything is expressed in the game. And finally, obviously, you would share and discuss it, and it's kind of a living document. So it's an ongoing process of making sure things are documented. So if someone's got a question, they can hopefully find it before they, you know, they have to kind of track you down. So that's mission breaking. Another one I do a fair amount, obviously, is feature design, which is common to design roles. So design is basically fixing a problem or addressing a problem. So for example, you know, you'd have a game and there's going to be a dialogue, there's going to be dialogue in the game, but you don't have a system for it. So you have to work out a system. So that would be understanding what's needed, understanding the limitations. For example, you might want a dialogue system that's, you know, it's all cutscenes, it's all beautiful 3D kind of rendering. And actually, technically, you can only do 2D and you can only do a few words on the screen at the same time. Okay, so how can I design that? And obviously, understanding support available. So what is the tech you've got to build it? What are the tools you have? What are the other systems that maybe interact with the dialogue? So if you have, which I had on my last project, if you have an inventory system, and if the dialogue talks to it, you have to make sure they can talk to each other. So you have to maybe talk to technical teams, art teams, UI, etc., to get it done. And obviously then you go through the design phase, which is kind of finding an elegant solution to the problem within all these limitations. You typically do some prototyping, so you try and mock it up as much as you can. And of course you document it. So you would say, okay, what's the purpose? What am I doing? What solution am I suggesting? What are the dependencies? So what do I need from tech or from UI, for example, to make my dialogue system? How does it look like? So you can do some sketching or, you know, some kind of mock-up. If you have an art friend, you can maybe ask them to do that for you. And of course, if you've made a prototype, you would link it so other people can see it. You take a video or put it in the engine and allow people to kind of experience it. And of course, once that's done, you would do a lot of testing. So you test it in the game. So does it play well with the other kind of elements within the game? You'd play test it with kind of external people. Like, does the feature work? Does it give you the experience you need? Does it make sense? So for example, maybe you have a really great dialogue system, but players don't know how to advance to the next bit, and that is a problem. Or you've got key mapping, which is not intuitive for the player. So it's the kind of thing you'd address at this stage. And then hopefully at some point you sign it off and it's implemented. But as with all design kind of tasks, it's all about iteration. So it's all about kind of improving the idea. You know, maybe another system changes which will affect you also. You have to constantly be ready to, you know, change your idea, maybe throw away your ideas sometimes, and kind of to get to the best solution for the player. So it can take a while. So again, hopefully, I hope that gave you a good idea of what that means day to day. If that's something you want to get into, what does it take? So what is my advice to you for becoming a narrative designer? So it's obviously about you. So it's about your profile, what you enjoy doing, and maybe some of the qualities you have, which would really shine as a narrative designer. So the first one is something I've obviously heavily mentioned is you have to be a collaborator. You have to be someone who likes working with people, exchanging ideas. You know, you have to be kind of positive about getting feedback, giving feedback. It's really important. Obviously, because you're a designer, very play focused. So you're making a game for the players. You know, it's all about making sure that players have a good experience, and it's about making sure you understand the medium you're working in, so you can create that experience for the player. And obviously, because this is narrative, you have to be narrative focused. What I mean by that is you have to kind of want to tell stories through games, which is a very unique medium to tell stories. And you have to be someone who kind of likes the whole interactivity of games, as opposed to maybe like a book or film that are great experiences, but are less, hands-on effectively. So if that's something that interests you, narrative design is definitely right for you. And finally, and that's something I'll come back to, I think it's really important that you want to be an agent for change. So the gaming industry has a lot of problems with diversity and other things. And I think it's quite important that, you want to be someone who can challenge that and change that, and you understand that, the value of different perspectives and cultures. And it's especially important in narrative design, because you're really kind of creating this story experience, this kind of sometimes emotional experience for players. And if you don't have that in mind, if you don't have that kind of respect for other people in mind, that can create some massive disconnects, and in general, it's not a good thing. So in terms of skilling up, I'm just going to have a quick drink before I go on. So in terms of the skills that you may already have, or maybe you want to develop, what are good things to focus on if you want to be a narrative designer? So the first one obviously is game design. So with all these things, game design, narrative design, there's obviously, there is some theory out there, so you can kind of learn, in theory how it works, but the best way to develop really is to play games, make games, kind of analyze what you see, what you experience. So for example, in game design, if you play a game and it works really well for you, why does it work? So always ask yourself, okay, what is the game doing that is working? And equally, bad games are really great. So if you have a game you really hate, sounds weird to say that, but please spend some time on it and try and work out why. Like, okay, why doesn't it work? For example, if you have a game where the leveling system is really frustrating to you, is it because it's too slow? Is it because you don't get the reward you expect? Is it because the rewards are not meaningful in terms of gameplay? Like, try and ask yourself why. And try and ask yourself what you would do as a designer. Like, how would you change it? And especially if you have interviews, this is something that comes up a lot. You'll be asked, typically, have you played our games? Pick something you don't like and change it. So it's a good skill to develop. And that works for narrative, very much the same way. If you experience a game that, I don't know, the story, the kind of feel of the game feels really great, ask yourself, okay, what did I see? What did I hear? What did I play? What made me feel so good about this game? And, things that are good, and again, things that are bad. Like, if the game failed for me, why did it fail? So it's all about the why. And like I said, the kind of golden rule of becoming a designer in general is to make games. And I really mean small games, as in tiny, tiny, tiny games. So you can make games on your own. You can make games with other people, like game jams or collaborations. I will give you some resources, but there's loads of engines out there if you haven't kind of tried yourself yet. There's loads of tutorials that literally will hold your hand through the process, but it's a really good way of seeing what goes into making a game. And the more skills you pick up, the more you can make on your own. And again, when you do job interviews or when you kind of talk to people in the industry, the more you can show of projects you've made, the better your chances will be. So it's really important. And these are all kind of, I guess, hard skills, but of course, as I mentioned before, soft skills are really important. So empathy, having respect for others, like perspectives and disciplines, being very collaborative and being organized, I think serves you well, because again, games are really complex. So the more you can kind of keep track of everything that's going on, what you need to do, what you're lacking, the better your experience will be, I would say. And of course, I think there's tons of other skills that are relevant to design and to narrative design that you may already have, and these are all like pluses to your profile. So if you have other design experience or writing experience, programming experience, or art experience, even if it's just art in terms of sketching, making little storyboards, anything helps. I mean, design is quite a broad discipline, and people come from really different backgrounds, and you find that it's all these little skills that you pick up along the way are really helpful as a designer. And in terms of pathways, you might ask, if you want to get to narrative design, who is a typical narrative designer? So typically in the industry, they can come from game design. There's a lot of crossover between the two. Other design, production, which is kind of my case, academia, writing, QA, theater, which is interactive storytelling, or can be, architecture, many other fields. So I guess the message here is, narrative design, like design, it's very broad. You can have people coming from any place. The golden ticket to become a narrative designer and a designer is a portfolio. So it doesn't really matter where you come from. If you can show that you understand the discipline and that you've kind of made some steps into making, narrative design work yourself, this is what gets you the job, basically. And finally, I'm gonna kind of share my experience about being a woman in games and talk a little bit about diversity. So I'm going to start with some facts and stats, which you may have come across. And there's a link at the bottom of my slide with some resources that you can check with the stats. So this is focused on women, but you'll see what the problem is very soon. So if you look at players, so people who play games regularly, so you're not talking about, you pick up a phone to play every couple of weeks or something. No, people who play games most days, 50-50 between men and women. If you look at people who work in the industry, you end up with 28% women, 2% non-binary people, and 70% men. And as if that's not bad enough to look at this, this is significantly under national average. And on top of it, it does not account for development versus publishing, because you tend to have more women in kind of marketing, HR, PR, so really, highly skilled jobs, but not development. And it's specifically a problem for STEM, kind of the programming or technical side of it. Another issue is if you look at seniority. So again, you can check these links, but in terms of seniority, the percentage of men goes up to 77 to 80%, and it's white men as well. So as you can see, there's a really big problem with diversity, women and other kind of types of diversity. The gaming industry is not doing great with that, and it needs to be better. And we are working on it, but it is very much a work in progress, and there's quite a big disconnect at the moment. So just to touch on diversity, again, I will put some resources for you to kind of listen to experts on the matter, talk about it, really interesting stuff out there. So what does it matter? Because obviously players are diverse, games are played by millions of people. There's a lot of diversity in the people who consume the games. And representation matters. So, we should have the players and the people making games represented in the game and in the teams as well, the teams making the game. And why? Because also, it does create better products, because the more diverse the backgrounds, the experiences, the lifestyles, the better games you're going to build, the better the stories will be. And which means that, it's the right thing to do, because this is kind of breeding some positive changes. Games are cultural products, they're experienced by loads of people, they can have a big impact on people's kind of lives and perception of cultures and others. So it's really important that we kind of improve diversity in games, and there's a kind of big drive to do that at the moment, but like I said, it's not there yet. And just to kind of share more specifically my experience and what I found useful as a woman in games, so it's not always been easy. But there are some things that you can do if you are yourself a member of an underrepresented group, or if you want to help, if you want to support women or people of color in games, what can you do? So a really key thing you can do is to build a network around you. So reach out to people like you, or people who kind of can understand your experience. So you can reach for advice, support, you can exchange on what's been helpful, other people that supported you, and that kind of feeds into the next point, which is to find allies. So allies being people that are not necessarily from your group, but who understand and want to support you, can give you advice, and that can be at work or outside of work as well. Especially, with social media, you can meet loads of developers who are, there's a lot of good people in game development that want to support you, you can speak to. So I really encourage you to do that. And no, you're right. So, I hope that if you go into the gaming industry, you'll never have any issues. But if you do, unfortunately, it's really helpful to familiarize yourself with what your workplace can do for you, with your policies, the help available, and also with the law, because discrimination is illegal, and you have some rights, you have some ways to kind of challenge it. And the more you know, the better place you will be to challenge it yourself. So it can be quite useful. And something I want to say, it may come up in the Q&A, but it's that your mileage may vary. So what I mean by that is that the industry is really big, so studios are really big. I work for Ubisoft, which is huge. And And your experience will really vary depending on where you work, what team, what, even your co-workers. So you can have a great experience. Someone may have a terrible one. They don't invalidate each other, but they both exist. And it's really difficult to kind of assess company culture before you join a company. So the more work you can do before joining, so maybe speaking to employees if they're comfortable to share with you their experience, and also kind of try and ask questions that you interview, keep an eye on what the company is doing, what initiatives they're doing. The more you can find out, the better position you will be to work there or to choose not to work there, obviously. So we're going to go into the Q&A shortly, but before we do, I wanted to give you some resources to look into. So of course, I very much have my own biases. There are things that, I have my blind spots, so I will give you mine, but I will really encourage you to seek your own sources, to see, seek kind of different experiences, different backgrounds, different cultures, how other people approach games. But here are some that I found really inspiring. So on making games, so if you want to make games, maybe you're in a situation where you haven't done any game, some good places to start. So Start Making Games, really great website, which you may know already, I'm not sure. This covers loads of topics around engines, jobs in the industry, interview tips, breaking down like how you build those skills. It's a really, really just like one-stop shop for anything to do with starting. I opened the link by accident. Nope. Sorry, let me share my screen again. Sorry. So hopefully, let me. Can you still see my screen? I don't know, Dan, if you can let me know.
Yeah, we can, but it's in preview mode, so you're kind of seeing two things at the moment, so it's not full screen.
Okay, let me just, sorry about that, I'll share again. Hopefully, yeah, I clicked on the link, shouldn't have done that. So let me quickly go to the right slide. You're going to see all the slides again. I will get there eventually. Because it's a great refresher into my presentation. If you don't remember something, here's your chance. Too many animations. I don't know if there's a way to skip. We're getting there slowly.
If anyone sort of jumps on the feed now, I think we've gone into like fast forward mode or something. It's great.
Exactly. So I just want to see all the colors like for 30 seconds. Yeah, I went with an 80s theme. I hope you found it pleasing, but yeah, it's all themed. Cool. So we are getting there. So, and resources Q&A. Okay, so this time I'm not going to click on any links. And there you go. So making games. So we were talking about the website, Start Making Games. What you'll see on the website, what you probably, some of you, if not most of you, have come across obviously is game engines. There's a ton of stuff out there which is free. Unity and Unreal are kind of the big guns. You have smaller engines like GameMaker and Bitsy. So depending on your skill level, you can kind of pick one up and learn stuff. There's tons of resources to help you get started. So I really recommend trying them. Obviously, Game Developer Conference, or a yearly conference with developers talking about their craft. They have loads of videos online on GDC Vault, also on YouTube. Some of it is gated, but there's a lot of really good free stuff. So a really good place to kind of, if you're interested in different jobs in the industry, to get started. Free books that I really, really love that kind of have a lot of practical advice that are still on my desk today. So you have The Art of Game Design, which is kind of a really playful way of looking at different aspects of game design. I don't agree with all of the book. There are some parts I really disagree with, but in general, it gives you kind of a really playful overview of what it means to be a designer. The Game Narrative Toolbox, which is focused on narrative design, again, really practical, gives you loads of tips on building a portfolio, which may be helpful. And Architectural Approach to Level Design, which is obviously more focused on space architecture, how you can communicate tone through the level design of the game. It's super interesting. In terms of narrative design, so if you kind of enjoyed what you've heard about it, and if you want to find out more from experts, Kate Tremblay did a really cool, really cool presentation on storytelling with verbs, again, focused on expressing narrative through gameplay. Lee Alexander, who designed Reign Her Majesty, which is kind of a card-based narrative game, so she has a lot of insight on the process. Brooke Maggs, who narrative designed the game Control by Remedy, so a really kind of interesting game in many, many ways, excellent narrative design, and she gives an insight of the practicality of being a narrative designer making this game. Katie Chironis, who's a game designer that I have a lot of respect for. So she's a game designer who also did narrative design, and she's got this website to kind of help you get started, get loads of tips on finding a job, interviewing, design tests, all that kind of more practical side. And Khan, who works for Dambusters. So this is kind of a really good, really clear introduction to narrative design in text form, where she puts a lot of examples as well to kind of help you understand the field a bit further. And John Ingold, so he works for Inkle, and they're a company that make world-class kind of narrative design games where gameplay and narrative are just totally in synergy. So he's obviously very talented, and he's given this really excellent talk about how to write really good dialogue. So if you're more interested maybe in the writing side or in how the characters interact, this is a really good place to start. And I will give you a few pointers on diversity as well. So again, remember I have my own biases, but these are hopefully places where you can kind of expand your knowledge on all these topics. So you have this great organization called People of Color in Play. This is a really good video about making a better games industry for Black people and beyond. You have Meghna Giant, who's a narrative designer, on 10 ways to make your game more diverse. So if you are starting to make games, please check this video out. Lots of good stuff in it. You have Jan Lopez, who talks about gaming culture, so how the gaming culture has the problems in gaming culture and what we can do to upgrade it, which is really informative. Obviously, People of Color in Play, and Can I Play That, which is focused on disability, so gaming as a disabled person. Raise the Game, focusing on how they can help big organizations kind of make changes. And Feminist Frequency, so more focused on kind of feminism and women kind of culture matters in games. So all of these organizations do a lot of work, they have a lot of resources, so I really encourage you to check them out and to, hopefully make more diverse games with me. And that is it. So you can contact me here. I'm sure I'll be able to share that again with you, but that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pauline. That was great. Some really great stuff in there. And hopefully that's piqued the students' interest in narrative design. It looks like we've had a few questions come through. And Pete's fielded a few to me as well while we've been watching. So the first question is from Patrick Allen, and he asks, what type of portfolio work is important when applying for narrative design roles?
Yeah, so I think, again, small games. So I would really encourage you to make small games. They can be very small. They can be even, I guess, prototypes or even broken games, but you have to show that you have that kind of, the process of making a game. You've tried some maybe narrative features. So for example, you could make a really small game in Unity with a conversation system to show that you understand the kind of dependencies between, what the player does and how the story is communicated. That would be where I start. I know Twine is mentioned a lot, but which is a valid way, but Twine does lack a lot of kind of gameplay elements. So my personal recommendation is pick up Unity or Unreal, do a few tutorials, make a really tiny game, kind of a proof of concept, and put that on your website. And I would also say that, as a designer, it's kind of about showing your thought process. So if you've made that small game, explain what you did, why you did it, maybe what didn't work, your limitations. It's totally fine to say, you wanted to make a feature and you couldn't quite realize it, or you didn't have the programming skills or the art skills to do something. It's okay to be vulnerable, but show that you can make a game, because I think when you're interviewed, basically what people want to know is whether on day one you can kind of get what your job is, and you can get started that way. So if you can show that you can make a small game, that's a really great way.
Great, that's great, thank you. Another question here from Tom Lowe. This is an interesting one for a narrative designer. Have you ever tried creating a scene with no dialogue?
Oh yeah. I don't know if that's, I might get some hate, I don't know. I'm kind of, I think words are a really great way to express narrative, obviously, especially when you have beautiful writers writing beautiful things. It's wonderful, but for me, because I also work on cinematics, I'm all about removing words. And I think to kind of not rely on words is a really great way to kind of challenge your design mind, to kind of say, okay, how can I communicate this information, but without telling the player? So, it's that kind of show don't tell. So actually, I did a few games at university where I really had that focus of no words. There's one on my website called Sushi Ya, if you want to check it out, which is about selling sushi in a shop, really random. But in the game, basically, I had to communicate stuff like the customers are getting angry, you're overwhelmed with stuff to do, you have to, your stock's running out. And instead of saying, oh, your stock is running out, or this customer is angry, I kind of played around the kind of facial animation of the characters, kind of making them look physically angry or making them go really red and kind of flashing. I played obviously with the visual of it, making sure the visuals are very clear and you can really see like stock depleting. So you can kind of play on other things. You can obviously play with sound, you can play with atmosphere. I think one example that's discussed a lot is Thomas Was Alone, that game where you are basically a block. And there's so much communicated to you. I think that's really wonderful. And I think I would really encourage you as a narrative designer or like a potential narrative designer to have no words. It may piss off some writers that I'm saying that, but that's my advice anyway. So yeah, really good way to show your skills.
Cool, thank you. In your experience, so working with bigger design studios, do you think you need to have a degree to be more desirable, or is it more important to work on lots of different projects and have the sort of experience on your thing, or is it a mixture of both?
So I think, yes, a really interesting question. It really depends on your own circumstances, but what is the most important thing is your portfolio. And basically, as long as you have one, it doesn't really matter what you did to get it. So I went to university because for money reasons, I couldn't afford to just support myself. And I wanted to take a break from kind of my career because I used to be a project manager. So for me, it worked out really well because I could really take the time to explore game design. I could take time to make projects. If you're in a situation where you think you can get the same kind of level of, you can make games, you have a network who can kind of test your games, give you meaningful feedback, I think that's really valuable as well, as long as you can build that portfolio. So there's some really good university courses, obviously. If you can't go to uni or if you studied something else, for example, I think it's really valid to kind of try and build that network of people who can give you that feedback, because design is about iteration and kind of improving design. So it's, it's fun to work on your own, but you have to be kind of player facing again. But yeah, I think make a portfolio, and that is just the one thing you need, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think that's very good. Yeah. This is a question, I'm just going to try and, Toby Yaxley. Where did you sort of get into narrative design? And I think this kind of feeds into one of the other questions that we've had as well, which is kind of, is narrative design something that people set out to do, or do they set out to do something different and then move into narrative design? Is it more of an organic thing that you end up being a narrative designer, or I suppose from your point of view, how did it happen for you?
Yeah, sure. So I'll tell you how it happened for me. So for me, I really love game design in general. So I set out to actually become a game designer. But the more games I made, the more I realized that myself, I was kind of more focused on communicating the story, basically. So when I worked in teams, I really like systems design as well, but I had team members that really wanted to make, like, I don't know, crafting systems, stuff like that. For me, I was like, no, I really want to play around with how the story is told. I want to play around with the non-verbal elements of the game. And so the more I made games, the more I realized that was kind of for me. So I would say, yes, by making games that I realized. In terms of other people I work with, so it kind of depends, because narrative design is quite new. So typically it's people from other fields that have kind of discovered it along the way, like me, and decided, oh, actually, I really like this bit of design. I think there are also some people like that come from maybe more writing backgrounds, like creative writing, that, really want to be narrative designers because they want to kind of use their craft in a game. So I guess in that sense, it's maybe like a clearer path. But it really is a mixture. And I think for me, I was just coming from game design, falling into narrative design. But I think one thing to bear in mind is that game design and narrative design are quite close together. So there's a lot of overlap. So if you look at people like Katie Chironis, again, she's someone who kind of went both ways. So she did a bit of narrative, went back to game, did a bit more narrative. So it can be quite fluid. So yeah, don't feel like you have to restrict. I would say, don't feel you have to restrict yourself to one thing. Game design is a good place to start because it's quite broad, and see what you like, basically.
Do you think there's been a definite move? I mean, I've always, and certainly in the sessions that I've done with the students recently, it's a noticeable shift towards more narrative-driven games. I think, you know, with Telltale, Walking Dead, probably that's where it started to move into that, and people realised that they had that sort of buy-in to character emotions. Do you think that's, from your point of view, obviously as a narrative designer, I'm assuming that you're aware of that, but you know, is it something that's going to continue growing? So is narrative design a really cool area for people to get into?
I hope so. Yeah, I think what's been happening is games have always had stories, but I think there's been almost like the medium wasn't kind of fully explored, in that, you know, you tended to have like kind of blocks of text or just like cutscenes on their own, and then the gameplay separate. And I think as games developed, and again, really good example with Telltale, I think the gaming industry realized that, you know, both can really work hand in hand, and there's actually a lot of benefit in having a discipline that just looks at that in particular. So I think, yeah, narrative design is, I believe, is gaining traction. The teams are growing. There's increasing kind of need for that kind of job. It's still a very, in a way, a very niche kind of field. It can be a bit hard to get into, but I hope that in the future it's going to kind of get a bit easier. But yeah, I think as games keep on growing, it's definitely a field that's going to stay, I think. Well, I hope, because that's my job. So, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And this question actually feeds into it nicely as well. So when you're working on a narrative involving issues such as discrimination or other things that, you know, are quite hard to handle, what do you think is the best way to go about finding people willing to share their experiences to make that narrative more informed? I think that's another interesting thing with the way that games have gone. I'm thinking with, you know, Mafia 3 is a good example of something that kind of covered some interesting sort of territory, and also a lot of the Ubisoft games do as well, don't they? So how do you go about finding out information? And you know, from a student point of view, obviously they might want to do games that do cross over into areas that might be uncomfortable, I guess, for some people. Yeah,
for sure. That's a really good question. It's honestly really difficult. I mean, as an individual, you know, it's really, as I said, I've got a lot of biases. You know, I'm trying to make better games, but it's really hard. So one thing you can do is obviously have kind of consultants that will do cultural reading of your game or the content you produce. You know, just like you have researchers for maybe more kind of factual historical content, you can have some sensitivity readers. What Ubisoft is trying to do as well, and I think probably a lot of other companies, is to have that on a more kind of systemic scale. So you'd have teams that are kind of dedicated to, you know, getting in touch with these people, to kind of making sure that, you know, the points of view are kind of coming across right, that we are not crossing lines we shouldn't be crossing. I think it's really in progress. Like as you've seen in, unfortunately, many games, you know, there are times where with the best intentions, actually the games come out and, you know, they don't come out right. So it's in progress. I think it's reaching out to the right people, basically. And I think being really honest about the fact that you have biases. So you know, you're not always the right person to decide on something. You have to trust these people that know. Yeah, which is an ongoing process, I think.
absolutely, yeah. And I think it's that sort of getting first-hand knowledge of the issues as well. I think that's really important, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, you know, for students, try and talk to people who've actually faced those situations. Try and talk to people who've actually had to overcome prejudice and discrimination, and then use that to inform their narratives. Yeah. Okay, so after that really deep question, we're going to go for a slightly less deep one. What's your favourite game that you've worked on during your career? It's difficult to choose a favourite child, isn't it? Yeah.
So the game I'm working on now, I can't talk about very much, so I unfortunately have to leave it aside. So I'm going to use the game I made before coming to Ubisoft called Project Madison. That's the one I kind of highlighted. It was really my first proper kind of game as a narrative designer, and it was just the two of us working on it, so it's a really small project. We made it in 3 months, and I really liked it because, yeah, it was kind of a baptism of fire in terms of, okay, we need to make like this fully realized game with our kind of limited skills, limited time, and it was a really good exercise in really testing the limits of your design skills, I guess. And I really liked it because, yeah, it really kind of allowed me to design some features for the game, to kind of, I did a bit of writing for it as well. I worked with someone who's a really talented developer with whom I could really kind of exchange ideas. So it was a really kind of positive collaboration. And I think it really stays, it's a game that is flawed, you know, it has bugs, it has design features that I'd love to improve if I had the time. But I think as it stands, as a product that we made in 3 months, it's something I'm quite proud of. So I think it also is to show that, sometimes your favorite games are not going to be the biggest ones. It might be stuff that has a personal meaning to you, and that's totally fine. And that's also why I encourage you to make your own games, because I think you will get definitely a lot of fulfillment at work, but the stuff you make on the side is really special as well. So definitely don't underestimate that.
Good. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. This is sort of tied into that as well. I think this is thinking more about the narrative that you've created. We've got Toby Yaxley has asked, what is your favourite moment that you've created within a game as a narrative designer? So it's kind of like in terms of the narrative itself. What's your favourite bit? And I guess as well, maybe we could tie that as well to your favourite bit in another game as well. Is there a favourite bit of narrative in another game as well as one of your own games that you've really enjoyed?
Sure.
Yeah.
So in terms of my own game, so just to go back to the project I was talking about, so Project Madison, you play as it's a game set in the 1960s. You play a secretary basically in a really sexist environment. And one of my favorite moments is introducing the kind of bad guy, the bad character, who is the person you're taking revenge on, basically. And it's, again, to go to the importance of playtesting, initially I used a lot of words to kind of introduce them to say, they're bad because of X. And then I cut all that and I just had one line of dialogue, which is like, when this guy meets you, you're the secretary, and he says, oh, you're the new secretary, you all look the same, which is incredibly disgusting thing to say. And then I remember when someone play tested the game and they came across that line for the first time, they're, oh, I hate this guy. And I was like, yes, this is it. So that's an example of like minimizing sometimes you can do a lot with very little. And I think just getting through that process and creating that moment, seeing the reaction of the person playing was really gratifying moment. So that's my favorite. In terms of games, I think, as I said, I'm a huge fan of Yakuza, and there's many moments in Yakuza that I really like. I think in the latest one, something I've touched on earlier on in the presentation, but I've played all the Yakuza games, they're all brawlers, and the moment I realized in the new one that you are going through a Dragon Quest system because the character's obsessed with Dragon Quest, and when you start seeing the incredibly silly names of the kind of mobs that you're fighting, that was a great narrative moment, because I felt like, oh yes, I'm in his head, I get what's going on, this is a good feeling.
Yeah, nice touch. I like it when they sort of do that meta thing and embed a game within a game. I used to like Shenmue as well. There was some really nice bits in that. Yeah. I've got a couple of technical questions. First one is, what's your favourite game engine to develop games in? And then the second one is very technical. Have you used the add-on Fungus in Unity for narrative design, and how have you found using it?
Yeah, so my favourite tool is Unity. I think purely because of familiarity, because that's why I use the Uni, and that's what I kept using. I can use Unreal as well, and obviously at work I use kind of in-house tools. I mainly use visual scripting. So Unity is a good tool. I mean, I gravitate, especially in my personal projects, I gravitate towards more 2D style games, and Unity is really good for that. Unreal is obviously super powerful, super good, but it's quite complex, and it's more geared towards like beautiful 3D games. So Unity is a good one. And yes, I use Fungus. I loved it. I used it for Project Madison. I thought it was a really great tool because it's very easy to pick up. It's really versatile. I used it for dialogue systems. I used it to kind of do callbacks into functions in the code. I used it to build like tiny cinematics. It can do a lot more that I haven't even explored myself. So again, in terms of, if you're someone who's not particularly technical, or if you don't want to spend too much time on the technical stuff, which is a valid point as well, Unity and Fungus is a really great combination, and I highly recommend it. So yes, I would also check out Ink. Ink is another tool that's a bit more maybe focused on dialogue and writing, but it's also really versatile, really well integrated with Unity. So Unity plus Fungus or Ink, good options. Go for it.
Good. So we are on trend. That's what I like to hear from students. Excellent. Good one here again as well. This is from, I have to keep moving slightly to see the name. Brandon Maynard. So as a narrative designer, is there something that hasn't been created yet that you would like to be involved in yourself? Are there certain topics, scenarios that you feel haven't been represented in the games industry, perhaps, that you would like to really be involved with?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I'm sorry I might not give a very deep answer because it's one I'd love to think about some more.
We do get deep questions unexpectedly from students.
It is great.
It is, yeah.
I really love, I have to say, so far, I really love all the questions. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I just on top of my head, I think, because it's very fresh in my mind because I've just presented on it, but just the topic of being a minority in games, you know, a woman, but also maybe a person of color, like, or disabled person. This is a big topic. This is a topic that's, you know, never, well, games, there's not many games about making games, maybe because we just fed up making the game, so we don't want to make a game about it. But yeah, I think that it would be great to kind of, you know, because games are really good at communicating experiences and how you might feel for a situation that you yourself may not encounter. I would love to put someone in that situation where you are in this position of making this creative product, and maybe you have some kind of, you know, frustrations, or you're kind of held back by people because of your, you know, because of your, I don't know, whatever minority you are. And I would love to give people an insight into that, and to kind of maybe make them realize how difficult it is, or to give it to people I work with as well, who are very supportive sometimes, but they don't experience the same things. So it would be a really great experience to share. You can talk about it, you can, you know, you can get some empathy this way, but to actually make someone play through something like that, that would be quite, that would be an interesting one I'd like to be part of. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, it's about raising people's awareness, isn't it? And often games do that in a very subtle way, don't they? You know, even games that are quite disposable, something like your Call of Duty World at War, for example, it definitely raises people's awareness of the issues that people faced during the war as well. So I think yeah, it's a really interesting thing to exploit in the games industry. So actually that leads on nicely to this next question. Sophie Byrne asks, what games in your opinion have the best representation and diversity in them? Are there any sort of standout games that you would recommend to our students that really do tackle those areas?
Yeah, on top of my head, again, that's one I've been talking about, but Dragon Age, historically, there's several, and they are very good at representation of, you know, showing people of color in positions of power, and you know, it's again that shows kind of minorities without making their minority the central piece of their character, and I think that's really important. You know, just showing people, as diverse people. That's a really great example. I think yes, unfortunately, the gaming industry, you know, there's not enough examples for me to give you, and that's obviously a big problem. I would say, you know, there's a lot more kind of indie games these days with diverse protagonists. I would really encourage you to check out, like, you know, stuff on itch.io and things like that. There's probably a lot more, but if you're looking for like more of a big budget game, Dragon Age is a really good one. Yeah.
Fantastic, yeah. And I think, you know, the interesting thing that, again, we constantly have as teachers of students, the students that are coming through, obviously they're asking these questions, are going to be the next generation. So hopefully things will change, and certainly my experience with students nowadays is they're much more aware of equality and diversity issues, and, you know, often facing it themselves, of course. So it'd be great to see some of that come through. Okay, so here's a technical question about the narrative stuff now, rather than the software. I know a lot of students get intimidated by that blank sheet of paper when they're trying to come up with ideas. So this question has come, and it's asking, how do you start to plan the narrative structure initially to a brief that you've been given? So basically, you've been given a brief about the narrative. How do you approach that? It's probably a deeper question really, that you can answer in detail now. But just to sort of, I suppose it's that facing that intimidation of having the blank sheet of paper. Where do we go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So say if you have a story you want to tell, and yeah, you want to turn it into a game. Again, coming from game design, I always look at what gameplay blocks are available to me. What do you do in the game, or what do you want to do? What are the things you should do to support your story? So again, you know, if you want to tell the story of a farmer, like inheriting the farm market, what do you want the player to do? How do you want the player to experience that story? So that's more the game design side. Once you have, I think coming up with a list of verbs is a really good way, because games are made of verbs. So, you know, do you have to talk? Do you have to tile? Do you have to buy? Do you have to sell? So try and come up with these verbs, I would say, and then try and work out in terms of flow, like, you know, it kind of depends how long your game is, but how would you chunk the story out? Because that's something I talked about as an narrative designer, we do a lot. So, you know, do you want to, you will have some beats that are very strong emotionally where something big happens, but in between you want to kind of give a bit of kind of contrast. You want to have some more expositional bits maybe, or some parts of the game where it's more about other characters. So try and find like a good flow for how you want to communicate the story. Maybe, I don't know, cut the story into 5 or 10 or something and see how that kind of fits together, making sure there's a bit of variation between the different parts. And once you have the kind of story flow like chunked out, and once you have the verbs, then you can kind of start thinking about, okay, is this levels? Am I talking about just a walking experience, or is it like level by level, or is it like just one big world? So kind of, it will hopefully flow naturally from there. But just to clarify, it's a really difficult task. Like it's really daunting, like for me as well. Like I think experience never quite takes that away, because games are just, again, so complicated. Like it's really difficult to be able to find the best way to tell a story. But start somewhere, and if you see, if you've chunked it out, if you've got some verbs, you see it doesn't work out, sorry, it's fine to go back to the drawing board and to kind of try again. Try and keep your mind quite flexible, which is part of being a designer as well. I hope that answers your question. It's a really tough one.
Really good, yeah. And again, that's something that I've often said to students. It's kind of like, don't be worried to start again, but don't necessarily throw away the thing that you've done, because at some point that might come in useful. It might not be useful right now, but it might be useful later on. I've got a really good question here. This is from, it's from a student, and he's asking, as someone who isn't very talkative, how do they approach getting into discussions with fellow workers in a company? So I guess it's talking about somebody who perhaps isn't as confident as some of the other students, maybe wanting to fit in terms of the working environment. And have you got any advice for them for that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a total introvert, first of all. So like I hear you. I don't know how we compare, but for sure I also have I find it hard. I would say that, first of all, it's something you build. So you in 5 years, you're not going to be the same person. So you will grow and you will learn to kind of. The more, it's unfortunate that you have to do that first step of doing it, but the more you do something like collaborating, the easier it will get for you. So I would say, first of all, don't worry, it's okay to be where you are, and you will grow into someone who's more confident. That's okay. And I would say at work, I think it's okay to be vulnerable. I think, for example, if it's your first day in a job and you have to deal with this massive team of, I don't know, level designers or something, prepare as much as possible. Like if you have some questions to ask, if my experience in the gaming industry is that it's okay to be vulnerable and to ask. Like it's okay to say you don't know. So you can say, I don't understand what you do. Tell me more. I need, what do you need from me? I've got these ideas. Are they kind of, are they what you're looking for? So kind of try and, feel your way through the kind of initial interactions. And then, yeah, it's about kind of prepare as much as possible. The more you're going to know your craft, the more the clearer it's going to be to you what you have to do in your role. So the more you be kind of confident presenting ideas. That comes with time. I mean, I'm still learning very much. So yeah, it's a mixture of like, keep doing it, prepare for it, and allow yourself to kind of not be 100% straight away, because you won't be, and that's okay. And if possible, like a good way to grow your confidence, I would say, is to, especially, if you're starting in a field, if you haven't made games, make game with people find people you trust, make games with them, see what difficult conversations are, see how you've approached them, how you can approach them better, keep communication open, and that will definitely help you when you start a job or making more projects. Again, I hope that answers your questions a bit roughly, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that was really good. So we've got another one here. Are there any games you can think of that have terrible narrative? This is the opposite of the previous question. I think basically anything pre sort of 1990 or thereabouts has terrible narrative, but because narrative wasn't really a thing for a while, was it? So is there anything that stands out particularly as really weak narrative? And if so, why?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So it's difficult. I don't want to diss any games or anything. I think definitely narratives evolved over time. It's a really tricky one. I'm trying to think, what's a game I've played that I really... Well, I'm going to give you an example of a game that I really love and that I think had some really big problems, is, again, to go back to Yakuza. So Yakuza is a really great game, but it's sometimes really bad at pacing the narrative for you. So you have like, honestly, 2 hours of cutscenes, and then you have like 5 hours of gameplay, you forgot what's happening. So that's a really good example of a game that's very dear to me, but that really has some issues. And I don't know where I think it's a game that's quite old now, like the first one was 2005, I think. So, it was a time before I think the industry really found its feet with like pacing games, pacing cutscenes and stuff. So there's definitely pace issues. And it's also, again, that frustrates me because of it's got really great narratives, but it does have a lack of diversity in protagonists, for example. And it's, again, that, yeah, just expects a lot of remembering information. You always have to take notes when you watch the cutscenes to remember who's who. So it comes from a place of love, because I really love the game, but I think, yeah, especially the early ones had some really big issues with that. In terms of, yeah, I think in terms of the stories themselves, like games, which stories I didn't like, I think there's probably a few that I can't think off the top of my head, but the way I tend to approach it is that if I don't like a story, I feel it's more personal. If I don't like the way a game delivers a story, it becomes like a more professional thing. So I'm more comfortable talking about the professional aspect of it. But yeah, I would say Yakuza, but it's a great game otherwise, so please play it still.
Yeah, and I think you gave some really good advice about if you're playing a game and you're not liking a game, then you've got to work as a games designer. You've got to work out why you don't like that game. I think we all do that. The instinct is, oh no, I don't like this game. I'm not going to play it anymore. But actually, what we need to do is play it more and work out why we don't like it. And I think that's a really good example there. This is a good question. Do you think that narrative design, or being a narrative designer, I guess, can you be successful in indie games companies compared to AAA studios? Because you had a bit of experience of both. So do you think it's a valid thing? Somebody could just work totally on indie games, be a narrative designer and be successful? Or do you need to make the jump to sort of AAA big company?
I think it's definitely both are valid, and I think, again, between, I mean, narrative design, but other disciplines, there's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of people that go back and forth between the two, that work in AAA, then work in India, and work in India, and work in AAA, or even stop to just make their own games. I would say the key difference is that the bigger the studio, the more specialized you are. So it means there's always a place for narrative designer. Well, there's most often the place for narrative designer. If you work for like smaller studios, indies, depending on the size, you tend to wear more hats. So you might be a more generalist game designer. So it might be that you do narrative design, but instead of that being 100% of your time, it might be, I don't know, 20% or maybe half your time. You're kind of a hybrid between game and narrative. So I think it's definitely valid, but if you're working for smaller structures, just bear in mind that you have to be prepared to kind of do other stuff at the same time, basically. So again, just to give a practical example, my role now is narrative designer. I very much focus on that. I don't do game design for the project I'm working on. When I worked on my previous project, Project Madison, well, there were two of us. So yeah, I did a lot of programming. I did a lot of design. And my project partner did a lot of art, so we had to kind of multitask. So I think it's definitely valid. It's just the proportion of pure narrative design might shift, basically.
Yeah, because indie games are definitely a more smaller niche thing, aren't they? So you've got to do more things, more
which is really cool. It's a really good way to learn as well. Like, and again, more generally, I'm not sure I've approached this, but if you're wondering whether to go AAA, indie, or work on your own, all experiences are valid. Honestly, you will learn just different things, but everything is valid. Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose it depends how focused you want to be as well. If you just want to be a specialist, then going down that AAA route is going to be probably more of a welcome option, isn't it? But if you want to be able to try lots of things out and be good at everything, then indie games is definitely the way to go. Great. So I think we're pretty much at the end of the Q&A now. We've got a couple of minutes, so if anybody wants to get a last-minute question in there, now is the time. I've got a good one here that's, I suppose, more about how you would approach it in a personal way. So this is, if somebody was experiencing discrimination in the games industry, how could you best support them? It might be from your own personal experience, or it might just be some advice for the students. I guess in a way this is probably something the students really sort of saying, if anyone's experiencing discrimination, how would you go about helping them?
So you mean as in me personally, like what advice I would give them?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's how they framed it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really tough one. So if you're experiencing that, my advice to you is, well, first of all, if something made you uncomfortable, that is valid. So it's worth raising anyway. So don't feel like, there's a lot of microaggressions that kind of build up to bigger problems. There's also obviously really clear cases of like sexual harassment and stuff. So first of all, your experience is valid. I would say the advice I would give is any help you can get, where you work, if you work in a studio, like who can you speak to? Do you know who to speak to? Are you comfortable speaking to them? How can you raise the issue, basically? I would say, if possible, like, have you spoken to other people who've experienced that? Like, if you're in a studio, like, I don't know, are there others, your minority group, or that maybe have kind of experienced some hardships that you can exchange to see if they've had similar experiences. And the next thing I would say is obviously raise it, like make it formal, make it, raise it quickly. Like there's nothing that's not worth raising. If it's a comment in passing, ideally you'd speak to maybe your manager to say, hey, this happened, I'm not sure, and it would help you kind of raise it further. If it's something serious, you raise it straight with, say, HR, or for example, at Ubisoft, we have some like anonymous tools that we can raise concerns, even if it's small concerns. So yeah, I think it's really important. Again, it's up to your level of comfort. If you can, don't be silent and raise it. Find people to help you. Again, going back to the point, like know what your company will and will not tolerate, and use it well. Like, especially if it's black and white, you can use it. If it's not black and white, you could probably make a case for why it made you uncomfortable, and there should be actions taken. So yeah, take it seriously and raise it is my advice to you.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely becoming a more aware world in terms of discrimination, and in the games industry we have been a little bit slow to react to things, especially with regard to representation, and I think it's changing. It's a gradual change, but I think there are some significant changes happening over the last year or so, so hopefully that will continue. That leads on nicely to the next question, which is from Katerina Senior. Do you have any advice for women aspiring for your role or attempting to get into the games industry in general? Very appropriate as it's International Women's Day. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, again, it kind of depends on your level of, I'm going to say tolerance, but just be aware that it's going to be tough, because there are people that will not take you seriously, if I'm honest. My experience personally is that the vast majority of people I work with, I feel my gender never comes into kind of question. It's me doing my job, rather than, me being a woman. So there's no kind of no condescending attitude or kind of belittling. But I have been in situations where that has been the case. I have heard of others who have been in situations like that. So be aware that there will be some situations where, unfortunately, as a woman, you will be discriminated against. Goes back to the point, kind of finding allies, kind of knowing your craft, and making sure you kind of push for the respect you deserve, basically, and yeah, my advice would be just, if you can, be careful where you work, be careful who you work with. It's okay to raise stuff. It's okay to not accept behaviors. It's unfortunate because it means the onus is on you a lot of the time to raise stuff, to kind of, complain about things, and that can be really hard. It's really draining mentally, to be honest. So, unfortunately, because the industry is not where it should be prepared for some uncomfortable situations, maybe some hardship. I hope not, but it could happen. And find some allies that can support you, that you can talk to, you can kind of chill out with, whatever you need. But it's definitely possible, and I think you'll find a lot of people are very open to women working there, but not 100%, if that makes sense. So
yeah, and I think it's just really important. You've got to keep pushing. These barriers will fall down eventually. We've just got to keep pushing at the barriers. So that's great. Well, that's the end of the Q&A now. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. That's been really great. And thank you again, Pauline, for doing the talk today. It was really, really interesting. I hope the students found it really interesting as well. I'm sure they did. Just remember, students, that you can tag with hashtag IW21 and share your experiences on Instagram and on Twitter. And there are some prizes available for the best tweets. So hopefully you can share some experiences from today's session with Pauline, and maybe win something. Hey, you never know. So thanks once again to Pauline. It's kind of like there would be a round of applause now, but you have to imagine that in this new virtual world, don't you? But I'm sure the students are applauding. If you can just hang around, Pauline, just afterwards, so we can just do the debrief chat, that would be great. And students, if you can post in the chat, if you lots of people are clapping now. Look great, fantastic. And just say thank you to Pauline in there. And then if you guys, as students, can just log off, that would be great. And then that will leave myself and Pauline in the chat just to finish up. Thanks everyone for attending. Hopefully that's been a great experience for everybody. I've really enjoyed Pauline's talk. I'm sure you did too. And thanks very much again.